She had learned, over 79 years of living, that the word help could mean many different things, and not all of them were kind. Evelyn Torres stood in her small kitchen on a Tuesday morning in late September, watching steam rise from her coffee cup in slow, wandering spirals. The kitchen was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic on the main road 3 blocks away. Sunlight fell through the window above the sink, illuminating dust motes that drifted like tiny galaxies through the still air. She lived alone in a 2-bedroom bungalow in a quiet neighborhood outside Sacramento, California. The house was small, but hers, paid off 12 years ago, maintained carefully, filled with furniture she and her late husband had chosen together over 40 decades of marriage. Gerald had been gone for 6 years now, and the house still held his presence in small ways. His reading glasses on the bookshelf, his favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle that he'd refused to replace, the indent in the couch cushion where he used to sit every evening. Evelyn took a sip of coffee and looked at the calendar on her refrigerator. Tuesday, her volunteer day at the library, then grocery shopping, then home to work in her garden before the afternoon heat became unbearable. It was a good life, simple, quiet, structured in ways that brought her comfort. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from her son. "Can you call when you have a minute? Want to run something by you." Evelyn set down her coffee cup and called. Marcus answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom, thanks for calling back." "Of course. What's going on?" "Nothing bad, actually. Well, I wanted to talk to you about something, an idea we've been thinking about." He paused. "Are you sitting down?" Evelyn smiled despite herself. "Marcus, I'm 79, not 99. I can handle standing while we talk." "Right. Sorry." He laughed, a little nervously. "So, here's the thing. Jen and I have been talking, and with the kids getting older and everything being so expensive and both of us working full-time, we thought maybe it would make sense if you moved in with us." The kitchen seemed suddenly very quiet. "Moved in?" Evelyn repeated. "Yeah, we have that spare room on the first floor. It's got its own bathroom. You could make it your space, and it would be... we'd love to have you here. The kids would love it. And honestly, Mom, it would help us out a lot, with school pickups and homework and just keeping the house running. Jen's overwhelmed, I'm traveling for work more, and we thought, you're alone in that house anyway. Wouldn't it be nice to be around family?" Evelyn looked around her kitchen, her small, quiet, hers kitchen. "It's a lot to think about," she said carefully. "Of course, I'm not asking for an answer right now. Just think about it, you. We really want you here, and I think it could be good for everyone." They talked for a few more minutes. Marcus explained the logistics, the room, the bathroom, how easy it would be to move her things. He mentioned the grandchildren, how much they missed her, how nice it would be for them to see her every day instead of every few weeks. When Evelyn hung up, her coffee had gone cold. She stood in her kitchen, in the house she'd lived in for 37 years, and felt something tighten in her chest that she couldn't quite name. Evelyn didn't make quick decisions. That was something she learned young and carried into old age. Quick decisions led to regrets. Better to sit with things, let them settle, see how they felt after a night's sleep, a week's consideration, a month's perspective. She went about her day as planned. The library was hosting a book sale, and she spent 3 hours organizing donations and chatting with regulars. Mrs. Chen brought in a box of cookbooks. Mr. Patterson donated his entire mystery collection. His wife had died in July, and he said he couldn't look at the books anymore without thinking of her reading in bed beside him. Evelyn understood that, the way objects held ghosts. At the grocery store, she ran into her neighbor, Linda, who asked about Marcus and the grandchildren. Evelyn mentioned the invitation to move in, not because she wanted advice, but because saying it out loud made it more real, easier to examine. "Oh, that's wonderful," Linda said immediately. "You must be so excited. I'd give anything to live with my kids, see my grandkids every day. It's definitely something to consider." "What's to consider? You're all alone in that house. This way you'd have family around. Purpose. Someone to take care of you when you need it." Evelyn smiled politely and changed the subject. But Linda's words stayed with her. All alone in that house, as if being alone was inherently sad, as if solitude and loneliness were the same thing. That evening, Evelyn sat in her garden as the sun set, pulling weeds around her tomato plants. The garden was small but productive. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs, a few sunflowers along the back fence that grew taller than she was. She'd been gardening for 50 years, knew the rhythms of planting and pruning, the patience required to wait for harvest, the acceptance needed when things died despite your best efforts. Gerald had helped with the garden in his final years. His mobility had been limited by then. Cancer had taken so much from him before it took everything, but he'd sat in a chair and offered commentary, pointed out weeds she'd missed, reminded her to water. After he died, people kept asking if she'd sell the house, move somewhere smaller, an apartment maybe, or assisted living, though she was perfectly capable of caring for herself. But Evelyn had stayed. The house held her life, her marriage, her children's childhoods, her routines and rhythms, and the quiet autonomy she'd fought hard to maintain. Moving in with Marcus would mean giving that up. The thought made her hands still in the dirt. She tried to imagine it, living in Marcus and Jennifer's house. Beautiful house, admittedly, 4 bedrooms in a nice neighborhood with good schools. The spare room on the first floor is spacious, newly painted. Marcus showed her pictures during his last visit. But it would be their house, their rules, their schedules, their noise and chaos and constant motion. And her role in it would be what exactly? Marcus had mentioned help, school pickups, homework, keeping the house running. Evelyn had raised 3 children. She'd done the tick-ups and the homework and the endless cycle of meals and laundry and crisis management. She'd loved it mostly, but she'd also been exhausted by it, depleted by it. And when her children had finally grown and moved out, she'd felt something she'd never admitted aloud: relief. Not relief that they were gone, relief that she could finally breathe. Evelyn was 21 when she married Gerald, 22 when Marcus was born, 24 and 26 when his sisters followed. She'd been a young mother in an era when young mothers were expected to sacrifice everything for their families. And she had. Gladly at first, then dutifully, then resentfully, though she'd never said so. Gerald's had been a good husband by the standards of his generation. He'd worked, provided, came home every evening and played with the kids before dinner, but he'd also expected dinner on the table, the house clean, the children managed. His work ended when he left the office. Evelyn's work never ended. She'd loved him, truly, but she'd also felt, for years, like she was disappearing. It wasn't his fault exactly. It was the expectations, the assumption that her time, her energy, herself, all of it belonged to everyone else first. She remembered one particular afternoon when Marcus was 7 and the girls were 5 and 3. The baby had been sick all night. The middle child had spilled juice all over the living room carpet. The oldest had forgotten to tell her about a school project due the next day that required supplies they didn't have. Gerald had come home from work, looked at the chaos, and asked, "What did you do all day?" Not meanly, just genuinely confused about why the house was a mess and dinner wasn't ready. Evelyn had stood in the kitchen, covered in baby spit-up and carpet cleaner, and felt something inside her crack. She hadn't yelled. She'd learned early that yelling didn't help. Instead, she'd smiled and said, "Kept 3 small humans alive. You're welcome." He'd laughed, kissed her forehead, offered to order pizza, and Evelyn had swallowed her resentment and told herself it was fine. This was what mothers did. This was love. She was older now. The children were grown. Gerald was gone. And somewhere in those intervening decades, Evelyn had learned something crucial. She had a right to her own life. It had taken longer than it should have. Too many years of putting herself last. Too many moments of saying yes when she meant no. Too many times shrinking herself to fit other people's comfort. But she'd learned. After Gerald died, after the grief settled into something manageable, Evelyn had discovered solitude. Real solitude, not just stolen moments between obligations. She'd created routines that were entirely her own. She'd learned what she liked: gardening, volunteering, reading without interruption, eating dinner at 5:30 instead of 6 because that's when she was hungry. She'd learned, finally, what it felt like to be enough on her own. Not half of a marriage, not primarily a mother, just herself, Evelyn, a whole person with preferences and boundaries and the right to both. And now Marcus was asking her to give that up. No, that wasn't fair. Marcus wasn't asking her to give up anything. He was offering her family, community, purpose. Wasn't he? Evelyn called her daughter, Sophia, the next evening. Sophia lived in Seattle with her husband and 2 teenagers. They talked weekly, usually on Wednesday nights. "Marcus wants me to move in with him," Evelyn said after the usual pleasantries. "Oh." Sophia's tone was carefully neutral. "What do you think about that?" "I'm not sure yet. He says it would help them out and that I'd be around family." "That's true. You would be." Evelyn waited. Sophia had always been her most perceptive child, the one who saw beneath surfaces. "But," Sophia prompted. "But I like my life. I like my house, my routines, my independence." "Then don't move." "It's not that simple. They need help. Marcus is traveling constantly. Jennifer is overwhelmed. The kids are in a million activities, and I'm alone here. Maybe it's selfish to stay." "Mom," Sophia's voice was firm, "you've spent 79 years putting everyone else first. If you want to stay in your house and live your life, that's healthy. But family doesn't mean erasing yourself. You can help them without moving in. You can be involved without sacrificing your entire life." Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest. Permission, maybe, or just acknowledgement. What if they resent me for saying no? Then they need to grow up. Sophia softened slightly. "Look, I love Marcus, but he's always been good at asking people to accommodate him without realizing what he's asking. Moving in with them wouldn't just be about helping with the kids. It would become your job, your full-time, unpaid job, and you'd be living in their space on their terms with no real autonomy. Is that what you want?" "No." "Then don't do it." They talked for another 20 minutes. Sophia shared updates about the teenagers, about work, about the endless Seattle rain. When they hung up, Evelyn felt clearer. But clarity didn't make the choice easier. She thought about her mother. long dead now, gone 15 years, but still present in Evelyn's memory with sharp clarity. Her mother had moved in with Evelyn and Gerald when Evelyn's father died. Evelyn was 42, the kids in middle school and high school, life already full and complicated. But her mother had nowhere else to go, and family was family. It had been a disaster. Not immediately. The first few months had been fine. Her mother had helped with cooking and cleaning, had been there when the kids got home from school, had seemed grateful for the company. But gradually, the dynamic had shifted. Her mother had started commenting on how Evelyn ran the household, questioning her parenting choices, rearranging the kitchen cabinets without asking, complaining about being bored, then criticizing when Evelyn suggested activities. And Evelyn, already stretched thin, had felt herself growing resentful, snapping at her, avoiding her, feeling guilty for both the resentment and the avoidance. Her mother had lived with them for 3 years before Gerald finally suggested they look into senior housing, a nice place, independent living, where she'd have her own apartment and access to activities and community. Evelyn's mother had been furious, accused them of abandoning her, cried and guilt-tripped, and made everyone miserable for months. But eventually she'd moved, and within 6 months she'd been happier. She'd made friends, joined a bridge club, stopped complaining constantly. And Evelyn, in her own home again with boundaries restored, had felt like she could breathe. She'd visited her mother weekly. They'd talked on the phone. They'd maintained a relationship, a better relationship, actually, than when they'd lived together, because proximity without boundaries didn't create closeness. It created resentment. Evelyn made her decision on a Sunday morning. She was drinking coffee in her garden, watching hummingbirds dart around her feeder when it crystallized. She would help Marcus and Jennifer, but on her terms. She called Marcus that afternoon. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said, "and I appreciate it, really, but I don't think moving in full-time is the right choice for me." Silence on the other end. Then, "Oh, okay. Can I ask why?" "I love you and Jennifer and the kids, but I also love my life here, my house, my routines, my independence. Moving in with you would mean giving all that up, and I'm not ready to do that." "Mom, here, you wouldn't have to give anything up. You'd have your own room, your own space." "Marcus, honey, I'd be living in your house, on your schedule, helping with your kids, your meals, your routines. That's not independence. That's being a live-in nanny and housekeeper." I didn't mean it like that." "I know you didn't, but that's what it would become, because that's what happens when boundaries aren't clear." Evelyn kept her voice gentle. "What I'd like to propose is this. I'll come stay 2 or 3 days a week, help with school pickups, homework, whatever you need, but I'll go home to my house at night, maintain my own life, my own space. That way I can help you from a place of strength instead of depletion." Another silence, longer this time. "I'll have to talk to Jen," said Marcus finally. "That's not exactly what we had in mind." "I know, but it's what I can offer, and I think it will work better for everyone in the long run." "Can I ask, are you sure this is about boundaries, or is this about not wanting to be around us?" The question hurt, but Evelyn understood it. She'd felt the same doubt when her own mother had resisted moving in. "It's about loving you enough to show up in a way that's sustainable," she said. "If I move in full-time, I'll end up exhausted and resentful, and that won't help anyone. This way, I can give you my best instead of my leftovers." Marcus was quiet. Then, "I never thought about it like that." Most people don't, but I've lived long enough to know that boundaries aren't rejection. They're how we love each other without burning out. Jennifer called 2 days later. She told me about your proposal, she said. Her voice was hard to read. I'll be honest, I was hoping you'd move in. I'm drowning here. I really need help. I know you do, and I want to help, but I need to do it in a way that doesn't erase my own life. I get that, I do, but it feels like you're choosing your house over us. Evelyn took a breath. This was the hard part, the part where she had to hold her boundary even when someone else was hurt by it. I'm not choosing my house over you. I'm choosing to help you from a place of strength instead of depletion. If I move in full time, I'll end up being your full-time help, no days off, no space to recharge, and eventually I'll resent you. I've seen it happen. I lived it with my own mother. This way, I can be genuinely present when I'm there and genuinely rested when I'm not. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. Then, my mom lives in Florida. She's never offered to help, not once. So having you offer anything feels like a gift. But I guess I wanted more. I know, and I'm sorry I can't be everything you need, but I can be something, and maybe that something, given freely and sustainably, will be more valuable than everything given resentfully. Maybe, Jennifer sighed. Okay, let's try it your way, 2 or 3 days a week. We'll see how it goes. Thank you. No, thank you for being honest and for helping at all. A lot of grandparents wouldn't. Evelyn started her new routine the following week. She'd drive to Marcus's house Tuesday and Thursday mornings, stay for dinner, then drive home. On Saturdays, she'd come for the afternoon, help with whatever needed doing, then leave before bedtime. The first few weeks were an adjustment. The kids were excited to see her, but also resentful when she left. Jennifer struggled to accept that Evelyn wasn't available for every need. Marcus kept hinting that it would be easier if she just stayed over. But Evelyn held firm. She helped where she could, homework, pickups, meal prep, playing with the kids, but she also protected her own boundaries. When she was tired, she said so. When she needed to leave, she left. When someone asked for more than she could give, she said no, kindly but firmly. And slowly, something shifted. Jennifer started managing better. She hired a cleaning service for the heavy housework and adjusted her work schedule to have Fridays at home. Marcus cut back on some of his travel, realizing that his family needed him present more than they needed the extra income from constant trips. The kids adapted. They looked forward to Grandma's days and made the most of them. Emma, the oldest, started baking with Evelyn every Thursday afternoon. Lucas, the middle child, did homework at the kitchen table while Evelyn prepped dinner, asking questions and actually listening to her answers. Mia, the youngest, demanded garden time. Evelyn had started a small container garden on their patio, teaching Mia about tomatoes and herbs. And Evelyn went home each evening to her own house, her own bed, her own blessed solitude. She was tired after her days with the family, but it was a good tired, the kind that came from meaningful work freely given, not obligation resentfully fulfilled. 3 months in, Marcus stopped by her house on a Sunday morning, unannounced, which was unlike him. Evelyn answered the door in her gardening clothes, dirt under her nails. "I should have called," Marcus said. "Can I come in?" "Of course." She made coffee while he sat at her small kitchen table, the same table where she'd received her first phone call about moving in. It felt like a lifetime ago, though it had only been a few months. "I wanted to apologize," Marcus said when she handed him his mug, For how I asked you to move in, I didn't think about what I was really asking. I saw a solution to my problems and didn't consider that it would create problems for you. You didn't mean any harm. No, but I was thoughtless. I assumed you'd want to move in, that you'd be thrilled, actually, because you're alone and we're family, and isn't that what grandparents want, to be with family? Some do, but not you. Or not in that way. He looked at her. You taught me something, Mom, about boundaries, about loving people without losing yourself. I've been watching you these past few months, how you show up fully when you're with us, but then go home and recharge, how you help without taking over, how you're present without being consumed. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. And I realized, Marcus continued, that's what I want to teach my kids. Not that family means sacrificing everything, but that family means showing up authentically, which requires knowing yourself well enough to know what you can give and what you need to keep. That's wise. I learned it from you, not from what you said, though that helped, from what you did. You could have moved in and been miserable and we never would have known, or we would have known but felt too guilty to do anything about it. But you were honest, you set boundaries, and it made everything better. Evelyn reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I'm proud of you, for hearing me, for adjusting, for learning. I'm proud of you too, for knowing what you needed and asking for it. That can't have been easy. It wasn't. I worried you'd think I didn't love you, or that I was selfish, or that I was choosing my comfort over your needs. Were you? A little bit, yes, and I've made peace with that, because I can't pour from an empty cup, and I'd rather give you some of me at my best than all of me at my worst. Marcus smiled. Jen says the same thing now. She started taking Fridays off, really off. No email, no calls, just time for herself, and she's been so much happier. We all have. The arrangement continued. Evelyn maintained her 2 weekdays and Saturday afternoons with the family. She kept her house, her garden, her volunteer work at the library, her quiet mornings with coffee and contemplation. And her relationship with Marcus's family deepened rather than fray. Because she wasn't exhausted, wasn't resentful, wasn't silently keeping score of everything she sacrificed. She was genuinely present, genuinely joyful, genuinely herself. Emma started calling her Wednesday evenings just to talk. They'd discuss books and baking and the complicated social dynamics of 5th grade. Lucas sent her photos of school projects, asking for feedback. Mia drew pictures of their garden adventures. Jennifer started joining them for Thursday afternoon baking, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. The 3 of them, grandmother, daughter-in-law, and granddaughter, would crowd into the kitchen, flour everywhere, laughing at failed attempts and celebrating successes. Marcus sent her articles he thought she'd find interesting, called just to check in, no agenda. The relationship worked because everyone had room to breathe. One evening in December, nearly 6 months after Marcus's initial request, Evelyn sat in her garden wrapped in a blanket, watching the winter sun set in shades of pink and gold. She thought about the choice she'd made, how easily she could have said yes to moving in, how much pressure there had been, external and internal, to sacrifice her life for theirs. She thought about all the years she'd spent doing exactly that, sacrificing without boundaries, giving until she was empty, resenting people she loved because she'd never learned to say no. And she thought about what had changed. Not them, they'd always been worthy of her love, but her understanding of what love required. Love didn't require martyrdom. It didn't demand self-erasure. It asked you to not set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Real love, sustainable love, required boundaries, required knowing yourself well enough to know what you can give and what you need to keep. Evelyn had learned this too late to apply it to her marriage, though she and Gerald had figured it out somewhat in his final years. Too late to apply it to raising her children, though she'd done her best with the understanding she'd had. But not too late to apply it now. Not too late to model for her grandchildren what healthy boundaries looked like. Not too late to show Marcus and Jennifer that showing up for family didn't mean disappearing for yourself. Not too late to live the last chapters of her life as a whole person rather than as whatever piece others needed her to be. The sun slipped below the horizon. The garden fell into shadow. Evelyn stood slowly. Her knees protested, as they always did these days, and walked back into her house. Her small, quiet, her house. Tomorrow was Tuesday. She'd drive to Marcus's in the morning, help with breakfast, do the school run, work on a puzzle with Mia, make dinner. She'd be tired by evening and grateful to come home. And Wednesday, she'd wake up in her own bed, drink her coffee in her own kitchen, tend her own garden, and live her own life. Not because she didn't love them, because she did. And because she'd finally learned that the best way to love others was to first love yourself enough to know your limits. That was the gift of age, the hard-won wisdom that came from decades of mistakes and course corrections and slow, painful learning. You couldn't give what you didn't have. You couldn't pour from an empty cup. And help, real help, came from a place of fullness, not depletion. Christmas came. Evelyn spent Christmas Eve at her own house as she'd requested. She baked cookies and watched old movies and went to bed early because she could. Christmas Day, she went to Marcus's house for the full day. Presents and chaos and too much food and the beautiful, exhausting noise of family. And that evening, when Marcus offered, again gently, for her to just stay the night since it was late and she'd be back in 2 days anyway, Evelyn smiled and said no thank you and drove home. Because she'd learned finally that she didn't have to explain her boundaries, didn't have to justify her needs, didn't have to make herself smaller to fit other people's comfort. She just had to live them. And in living them, in protecting her own life while also staying connected to theirs, she taught them something they didn't know they needed to learn. That love didn't require sacrifice, that help didn't require erasure, that family could be sustained by presence, not proximity. That boundaries weren't walls, they were bridges, and that sometimes the most loving thing you could do for the people you loved most was to love yourself enough to stay whole. Evelyn pulled into her driveway, turned off the car, sat in the quiet dark for a moment. Then she walked into her house, her small, quiet, perfectly hers house, and felt what she'd been afraid she'd never feel again after Gerald died. Home. Not because the house was special, because she was whole in it. And wholeness, she'd discovered, was the foundation of everything else. Everything that mattered. Everything that lasted.